There's Just Something About Kansas City is brought to you by the generosity of our friends with the Haverty family, the Illig family, the Kearney Warnell Foundation, UMB Bank trustee, the Sherman family, the Cockrell family, Kansas City Orthopedic Institute, Don and Mary Doherty, and the Bergman family. Thank you.
Welcome once again, folks, to another episode of There's Just Something About Kansas City, where we talk about the people, places, and things that make this city such a great place to live, work, and today I'm going to say explore, because you can tell we are on a remote. We are inside Thomas Hart Benton's studio, which is just incredible. One of the greatest artists in the 20th century, just an incredible man, incredible talent. We have Katie Hastert here. She is Thomas Hart Benton's historian. She also works for the Department of Natural Resources in the state of Missouri. And welcome, Katie, and thanks for inviting us into his studio.
Absolutely. I'm really glad I could share this with you guys. One thing that it would be nice for your listeners to know is that everything in here is original. So everything they can see if they're watching as well are actually belongings that the Bentons used. And specifically the tools out here are what Benton used. So yeah, it's really neat to be on site here. I'm glad you guys could come over.
Yeah, it is. I think it's incredible. The paintbrushes are here. The original paints are here. It's unbelievable. The sort of eerie part of it all is he completed his last, the Sources of Country Music. Yes. He completed his last mural in this room. He came in to do some touch-ups on it, right? Before it went to Nashville, Tennessee, where it resides today in the Country Music Hall of Fame. Yeah. But he was going to sign it and do a few touch-ups, and he died in this studio, right?
Yes, correct. The story goes that he told his wife, Rita, that he would come out, do some finishing touches, just as you said. He wanted to sign it, possibly finish it up that night, and he died from a heart attack. So if you are ever in Nashville and you get to see the one in person, which is still in the Country Music Hall of Fame, there are just little details that aren't quite noticeable, like there's no wire between the old telephone poles, there's no signature. He hadn't finished up with a coat of varnish on it. So there were enough like minor missing things that we could tell back in 1975 that he just really wasn't quite done yet. But the Country Music Hall of Fame said, it's okay, we still want it. So,
well, I would say,
who's going to reject that, right?
Well, absolutely, because that's part of the history. I mean, that's part of a great story behind it. Notice there are no, because he died in the studio just as he completed.
Well, and in fact, just last year, because he did the majority of the work in 1974, they did a nice 50th anniversary kind of exhibition where they put out a lot more of the things that aren't always on display, like some of his preparatory drawings. Benton would make models of his paintings, three-dimensional models, which are really neat. So they had that on display as well, and I think had a couple of special speakers during that period too at the museum. So it was nice that they did something to kind of honor that 50th anniversary of the mural.
Right, he has an incredible history. Just to give you an idea, if you do not know or have never heard of Thomas Hart Benton,
yes.
Once you see his art, you'll go, oh, that's who drew that. Because his art is incredible, and we'll talk about the man himself, but I know Ken Burns, the great documentarian, did a documentary on him, but as somebody probably suggested to him, or he saw a mural or whatever it was, and told him, they said, well, that's Thomas Hart Benton. You know how Ken Burns works. He probably thought, well, who's Thomas Hart Benton? Yeah. You know? And then he said, well, I probably don't have enough for a documentary. Oh, he had more than enough for a documentary.
Plenty. As soon as he started interviewing people, and I thought that Burns did a really great job of balancing people that loved Benton, loved his art, and then people that did not like it. I mean, you know, like with any artist, he had his fair share of critics. I always tell people, you know, he was one of those people you either loved or you hated. There was not always a lot of in between, right? Because he was very opinionated. And he didn't really sugarcoat some of his art either. He liked to show people what was going on around the country or historically. So he definitely, I think, did a great job in that documentary about kind of exploring both sides of that.
Yeah, right. In fact, people say, you know, when you see one of his murals, it's like an old Clint Eastwood Western. Yeah. The good, the bad, and the ugly. They're all involved on all the panels that he does.
Absolutely were. Yeah.
And so he's an interesting guy. He was born in Neosho, and parents were tough. I think it was a pretty rocky as he was growing up. Dad, very tough guy. His mom was on the artistic side. Yeah. His dad was the political guy, right?
Correct.
He was named after his his great uncle,
Great uncle.
great
Couple
uncle,
generations back, yeah.
who was a 5-term senator
Yes.
in the state of Missouri. So
Pretty
there was a lot of
wild.
politics here, yeah.
Absolutely.
And Thomas Hart, when he was growing up, he used to go with his dad to all these political rallies, and I guess Dad thought he was going to follow in his footsteps. But
His dad had high hopes that he would go to law school, perhaps go into politics. His dad had actually been a very successful lawyer before he was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives when Tom was a kid. So yeah, coming from this very political background and family, like I said, his father was hoping for law school and then going into politics. And apparently later on, when they were in Kansas City, there's a story where I think some of their friends were over for dinner, and they were like, Tom, you should run for, become a Missouri senator. And Rita, his wife, who was just a character in her own right as well, said, Tom, a senator, like anyone can be a politician, but no one can paint like Tom.
yeah, you know what?
So it's true, yeah. I think he chose the right path.
Yeah, she was right. And Rita, his wife, her parents didn't want her to marry him because they know the starving artist. When you say starving artist, there are a lot of starving artists. There aren't a whole lot of people who are making it in art back in those days, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Rita came from this very hardworking Italian immigrant family. They both met in New York City. And yeah, her family, as you said, was not thrilled. They were like, you're hanging out with this bum artist. Like, he's never going to be able to support you guys. And I mean, some of even their friends felt the same way. There's another great story where a friend of theirs was coming over to their awful, like, 5th floor walk up, like no hot running water in their apartment. And her friend was just like, well, Rita, how can you guys live like this? This is awful. And she just goes, my husband is a genius. And like just complete confidence that it would work out.
Who needs hot water?
I know, who needs hot water? We're gonna make it just fine. And they did. I mean, whoever has that kind of luck with being an artist? But Benton fully understood what he was getting himself into. He said, being an artist was the best job you could have if you could get through the first 40 years, which is true in his case.
That's exactly right.
They absolutely went through those really challenging years and very, very hard years. But he, by the mid-30s was doing quite well for himself. And it's kind of miraculous. It was in a decade during the Great Depression where hardly anyone was making it. So, I guess Rita's faith was not misplaced in that case.
No, it wasn't. And so when he was growing up, he was a very rebellious kid. He started to know that he had a talent in art. His dad, last thing he wanted to see was any artistic talent in the kid. And Mom encouraged him to keep on going. Dad was trying to keep him
more focused.
So he was a very rebellious kid. He was very short.
Yes.
Okay. And I think, when I look at this, he was 5'3", and he was teased all his life about being short. And I think that made him angry. And I have a strange feeling that was one of the reasons why his art was so big. The murals were just, he painted the walls in Jefferson City at the Capitol.
I think that's a great insight.
And he's just this tiny little kid.
Yeah.
I'll show him. I'm not some tiny little kid. I'm going to make this incredible mural art that he was famous for. In fact, the first time I ever saw a Thomas Hart Benton art, ever was shortly after we moved to Kansas City back in '81. Went to dinner at the EBT restaurant, and some people will remember it. It was on top of the bank at 435 and State Line. And we went up in the elevator, and then they had, as soon as you walked out of the elevator, there was this giant mural, and they're very unusual, the way his murals look.
Distinct, yeah.
Okay, distinct. You just know that's a Thomas Hart Benton. I had no idea who Thomas Hart Benton was. So I got out of the elevator and I went, oh my gosh, look at that painting. That's incredible. And then somebody said, well, that's Thomas Hart Benton. He's a Kansas Citian, longtime Kansas Citian. And that was my first introduction to him. But the colors and how vivid it was and all that. And then the scene, I think it was an old Western scene. And it was the cattle, because the restaurant had the beef and whatever, so that everything was done to perfection. So it was just, for me, it was my first introduction to it. But then you would see more and more of his art in more and more places, and it was just phenomenal. But his dad sends him to Western Military Academy to try to straighten him out a little bit with this art thing. Right, we're going to send him to Western, and he played football there at 5'3", but he was not well liked, was he?
He just didn't really fit in. I mean, he at that point had already kind of made up his mind that he was really far more interested in art. He absolutely didn't want to go the more traditional route that his father would have preferred. So, he eventually leaves there. He's not even there for a full year.
Yeah, right. He actually gets asked to leave. Okay. So I think with the Benton name, because of everybody else who was involved in the politics, I think they sort of gave him a break because he shoved a kid down a set of stairs, didn't he?
Well, yeah, and it's just really, he, like I said, did not want to be there. His father eventually recognized that this just wasn't going to happen, and I think luckily his uncle had left him some money for education. He was allowed to then go to the Art Institute of Chicago.
Right.
Now, I think if it had been up to his own father and paying for it himself, it might not have worked out.
Yeah.
But I think also it helped to have, like you were saying earlier, his mother was a lot more supportive of the arts and perhaps pursuing that side of things. So yeah, he eventually was allowed to study in Chicago.
Yeah.
And then after a year and a half there, he decides, okay, I've learned everything I can here, nothing like the arrogance of youth, right?
Yeah.
And then he was like, okay, I'm ready for Paris. So he did actually have that traditional art school background, but he did have to fight to get there, as you were saying. I mean, it was not something that his family initially wanted him to pursue.
Yeah, right. He went to the Parisian Academy, which would be like our Juilliard school here, right?
Yes.
It was the Parisian
Academy Julienne.
That's it, Academy Julienne. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
So he started learning. He left New York because, like you said, he thought, you guys aren't teaching me anything anymore. Or I'm sorry, Chicago.
Chicago, yeah.
And
yeah.
so you guys aren't teaching. I want to go. I want to go.
Wanted to go do it.
He was just hell bent. He knew exactly what he wanted to do.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And so yeah, he studied there, and as he would later kind of jokingly say, he tried every cockeyed ism there was, meaning impressionism, pointillism, cubism. And in the house, we actually have some early examples of his art. And you can see that experimental phase he went through. Benton was frankly not a great art student. He found art classes a little tedious. Some days he would get bored. He would ditch class. He would do his own sketches of the Louvre. And it kind of worked for him, but he was still struggling when he left Paris. I mean, he was still trying to kind of find himself as an artist.
Yeah, so he comes back to the United States and does what?
So he comes to New York, he's at home for a few months, just for a short period, kind of figuring out what his next move wants to be. But he does go to New York by 1912. So he came back from Paris in 11 and goes in 1912 to New York, where I think he felt he kind of needed to go to build up a name and reputation for himself. And at that point, he's unknown. No one in New York knows who this artist is, but he's persistent. And so he's still actively working. He also taught throughout his time in New York. Early on, he taught, adult drawing classes in Chelsea at the time. That's where he met his wife, Rita, in fact. He was doing some adult drawing classes and said, hey, stay after class so I can sketch you, which apparently is a great way to flirt with someone if you're an artist. So,
yeah, right.
The rest was history.
Yeah, all right. Yeah, I'm going to leave that one alone. Go ahead. You keep going.
The rest was history. So they dated from about 1917 and then were married in 1922. But I would say it's really just his late teens in New York. So we're talking like 1919. In 1918, he had done a short stint in the Navy during World War I.
Yeah, right.
And they actually knew he was an artist during the Navy time. So they asked him to draw all the ships that were in Norfolk. He also did some camouflaging on the ships, which was really interesting.
You're talking about a big canvas.
Oh my God, I know. And it was a really interesting thing that really only worked for kind of that era of like the warships, but it helped them kind of blend into the horizon.
Because there's no radar.
Yeah, exactly. So then, after that it was kind of obsolete, but it was a really interesting part of that. So he did do some actually kind of artistic work in the Navy, shockingly. He comes back to New York after World War I ends, and around 1919, he's still kind of struggling to get his own style. He's still kind of imitating artists that he liked in Paris, Matisse and Cézanne and people like that. And he tries this technique where he starts creating these three-dimensional models of his paintings. It was something he had read about some Renaissance artists like Tintoretto doing, and he decided to give it a try. And that is where that really distinct kind of three-dimensional look starts to come into his art. Like you said, the first painting of his you ever saw, it looks like the figures are going to move off the canvas
Yes.
almost. They're very bold, they're vibrant, they have an almost sculptural look to them. So that's what helped him achieve that look. So from about 1919 up until his death in 1975, he was using that technique, and it just completely transformed his art and what it looked like. So I find that very interesting.
Right, you talked about Cubists and all that sort of
Yeah.
thing. His was more, he called it regional.
Yes.
It was regionalism. And
correct.
it was like he would take this area, he loved the Midwest.
Yeah.
And he was trying all these other things. All of a sudden he came back, and I think it just sort of hit him that this is where I belong. I feel most comfortable
Yeah.
here, and this is what I'm going to paint. This is what I'm
Absolutely,
gonna do.
yeah. Around 19, I'd say mid to late 20s, he started taking these long trips. He took one through the Deep South when he was still living in New York. He started doing them once he moved back to Missouri as well. He continues doing them throughout his entire career. And he explored all over the United States. He would sketch the entire time he was on these trips. They could last anywhere from a week, sometimes up to a few months, just depending on if he was getting good material, if his money was lasting, things like that. But he would draw the entire time, and he would come back home with sketchbooks just chock full of ideas for projects. And so he really was almost kind of his own form of a documentarian. He was showing everyday American life. And as you said, it became known as kind of a regionalism. Some people also kind of put him into the American scene genre of painting as well, because he was just capturing the people and places around the country, and it was very appealing to people.
Yeah, he did not like the other artistic expressions by other people. But one of his students, I think, in New York was Jackson Pollock,
Yes.
right? Who, totally opposite of what Thomas Hart Benton was doing was his regionalism. Jackson Pollock was just like, he did his whatever it was. You look at his art and you sort of start doing this.
Yes, yeah.
Type thing. But he got along.
Yeah.
He and Jackson were lifelong friends, right?
So yeah, and Pollock, his older brothers had actually come to New York specifically to study with Benton at the Art Students League in New York. Benton had taught there off and on for about 9 years during his time in New York. And I guess his older brothers were like, hey, Jack, you need to come out here, and I think you'll really love this teacher we are with named Benton. He comes out, and Benton and Pollock become very close. They were close with his older brothers as well. But yeah, it wasn't just like a random student in one of his classes. Rita would have them over for dinners. He would babysit their son TP sometimes. He went to Martha's Vineyard with them in the summers a few times. So he really was almost like part of their family. They kind of took him under their wing. And for anyone who doesn't know, Pollock had a lot of his own struggles. I mean, he struggled with alcoholism. And I think the Bentons were kind of a stabilizing influence in his life while they were there. But I think when they left to move back to Missouri in 1935, it was kind of a shock for Pollock, and I think he really struggled after that. And privately, they stayed in touch until Pollock's death in the 50s. But personally or publicly, as Pollock's art became more popular in like the 50s, and Benton's art started to fall out of favor during that era, he kind of publicly distanced himself. So I find that interesting, But privately, they stayed in touch, of course. So it's an interesting dynamic for sure.
Yeah, right. We go back a little bit too. Thomas Hart Benton used to paint backdrops for silent movies.
Yes, he did.
when he first started out to try to, I guess you just try to make money. And then a backdrop for a silent movie though was another huge canvas.
Absolutely,
right, to work with.
enormous. And that was when a lot of the early studios were in New Jersey, so it was a lot easier while he was living in New York to do that. And that also, has been hypothesized that might be kind of where he got the urge to do these big, enormous murals. Right. I think that there were multiple factors that went into that love of doing murals, but that certainly would have been exposure to just painting on a large scale and painting these really bold, dynamic colors that would contrast really well on black and white film too. Yeah. So that definitely was an early influence for sure in his style as it started emerging.
Right. And now he and his wife, Rita, are having kids.
Yes.
They have 2 children.
Correct.
They both end up being incredibly talented as well, right? And they're both in their own rights.
Oh, absolutely.
I think one was he was a sailor and a boat maker and a musician, and the daughter was an artist, and she did all kinds of other different things as well.
Played guitar, sang a lot. She was very into like the 1960s folk scene. So they were both very interesting children, and I think growing up in this atmosphere was hugely impactful in that. Like on tours, if you go through the house, there's these gorgeous leaded glass windows. and 2 on either side of the front door are painted, and those were painted by their daughter Jessie when she was like 14 or 15 as a present for her parents one year, kind of a Christmas present, I think. And what I think is really funny is the right window, or I guess kind of on the north side, it's unfinished. So, clearly after, I guess being a typical teenager, she's like, okay, I'm done with this project. But I love it because not many parents would let their children paint leaded glass windows in an old home. Most of them would be like, honey, you can go practice on all the canvas that's out in your dad's studio.
Go get the sidewalk chalk.
Exactly.
Okay, go use that out there.
But they let her paint on the leaded glass windows, and the best part is it's still there. Like, they didn't scrape it off. They didn't, after she was older. I love that it's still there. It kind of shows that they encourage their kids to do stuff like that.
And on the musical side, he was a great harmonica player, right?
He was, yes.
He could have been, well, if you had a professional harmonica player, I'm not sure where that would fit in with the Kansas City Symphony, but I'm just saying he was professional. And they actually, Decca Records, cut an album Saturdays with the Bentons, or
Saturday night at Tom Benton's.
At Tom Benton's, and the whole family would play, but they got an album made of their music.
So one thing that I try to emphasize for visitors that come to the Benton home is he really was a Renaissance man. He dabbled in a lot of areas. And so of course he made his name as a painter, but music was a really big part of his life, their home life. As you said, he played harmonica. He started doing that in his early adulthood and became fairly proficient at it. He played with friends in New York. I think they were called the Harmonica Rascals, if I'm remembering the term correctly. And continues to do it with, friends and other musicians and neighbors here in Kansas City. And they got the idea to record this in 1941 with Decca, as you said, because they would have their friends come over. They'd have cocktails, they'd have a dinner party, and then afterwards they would play in the living room or out on the side porch if it was nice out for hours. So they had a really fun home life. And if you're a famous artist and you love music, why not record your own record, right?
Yeah, right. And the fact that the music theme, I think, flows into his art.
It does.
As well, right?
Yes.
So his love of music.
Yes, and we, talked about the Country Music Hall of Fame, his last mural. That is why he was asked to paint that. People knew that he loved music. He often collected folk songs when he traveled around the country. He was friends with a couple members of the Seeger family, Burl Ives. He was really, Tex Ritter was the one who asked him to do that mural. So, he had all these music connections as well, and he was the perfect person to do that piece. But aside from, the direct influence of sometimes actually painting musicians in his art, you can also just see this kind of lyrical movement throughout his paintings as well. So he really kind of applied that love of music in many different ways.
Yeah, there was a flow.
Absolutely,
you just see a flow, you just see it in his art. He sort of gets blasted out of New York because he tore the New York art scene apart, in an article. So he ended up coming back to Kansas City, and he taught at the Kansas City Art Institute for a while, didn't he?
Yeah, so I think it was called, a farewell to New York. But he's just like, I'm over New York, it's a dead city, I want to move back to the Midwest. And so he was not one to shy away from burning a bridge or two occasionally.
Right.
So.
And he actually wanted to sort of knock them because he wanted Kansas City to be the focus of American art, right?
Absolutely. He really thought that we would have this revival of art in the Midwest, and I don't think he's completely wrong. Regionalism really comes out in the early to mid 30s, and he moves back to Kansas City in 1935.
Right.
And 2 jobs brought him back. One was he became the head of the painting department over at the Kansas City Art Institute for 6 years, so that was 10 minutes away from where the house is in Kansas City. And then he was also asked to do a massive mural in the state capitol building too. So 2 fantastic jobs to come back to in the middle of the Great Depression.
Right. So if you've been to Jeff City,
yes,
and you go into the Capitol building, it's there. Okay,
it's
you can't miss it. Okay, it is unbelievable, and it takes more than just a glance. I mean, you have to walk around the entire state capitol to see the entire mural.
Yeah,
which is just
it's on these
phenomenal,
massive 4 walls, and there's always so much going on. And Benton liked to say that murals were his favorite because he could put more stuff in them. And that shows in a lot of his murals. I mean, there's just so many figures, there's always action happening. And his was specifically supposed to be a social history of the state of Missouri. And at that point, he really would only take mural commissions if he could have kind of some free artistic license. They could kind of give him a direction or subject, but he really wanted to have artistic license.
Okay, yeah, sure. No, okay, no problem. Now let me get to work.
Now let me go do what I want, yes. And a lot of people think that he had gotten a lot of like WPA commissions and things like that because that was wildly those programs were very big in the 30s. But he actually never did any WPA murals or pieces. He did one government commission, or he was asked to do one for the post office headquarters in Washington, D.C. And he said that they were meddling too much with what he wanted to add in there. And so he only did preparatory work for that project and then he left. He quit.
Yeah.
But yeah, so in the Capitol, by the time he was in Missouri here, he really wanted to, he's like, you can give me the topic, but I want to have, more artistic license. And as with many of his paintings, he added things that people loved and he added things that people hated.
And so, it was too late.
Yes, it was too late.
Yeah, and at the state capitol, there are 235 individual portraits on that mural, on those four panels.
And I'm not sure if you did, or if it said this when you were reading about it, but all of those were real Missourians, which I think is really cool.
His dad, right? Didn't he
yes,
portray
he painted
his dad?
Doing
his son, his daughter, his wife.
Yes.
He put them all in there as well, right?
They're all, like, a lot of people he knew were present, other people that he traveled around the state. Like I said, he loved to do those sketching trips, so he really would draw a lot of people that he wanted to incorporate into it. But he didn't, some artists kind of will maybe make up faces, especially if they're not a prominent focus. But Benton's were all real people, and they were all real Missourians, which I think is really neat.
Yeah, right. Harry Truman.
Yeah.
Of course, involved Tom Pendergast,
Yes,
a very controversial.
Scandalous,
He was scandalous, right? All part of it, right? And he had Huck Finn, Jesse James. Frankie and Johnny, very controversial part of that portrait too. Talk a little bit about that story and his influence there.
So he wanted to do kind of those Missouri legends, and Jesse James holding up a train.
Yeah, right.
Yes, and I don't think, Huckleberry Finn and Jim, obviously not as controversial. Most Missourians love Mark Twain and love those stories. But then, Frankie and Johnny, if you're familiar with the old folk song, or sometimes you'll hear it as like a jazz rendition as well. But it was based on a real story about this shooting in St. Louis, where this woman caught her man out with someone else. And she shot him.
Back with a gun. He deserved it, doggone it.
So we included that. And so, he always was notorious for adding in things that, some people might have wanted to brush under the rug a little bit. What I think is really funny is at the time, he finished it in late 1936. And at the time, apparently, one of the things that scandalized people the most was a woman changing a baby's diaper, and you could see this naked baby bottom in it. And they were just like scandalized. How is this in our capital? This was, but obviously different things have been considered controversial over different periods, but I did think that was always really funny.
Yeah, if
like of all the things.
if you go to Jefferson City, you cannot not go into the state capitol and see this. You've got to see it, You've got to see it. It's just one of those
I always
things.
tell people that visit, I'm like, if you haven't been there and you're close by, it is absolutely worth running in, getting a tour, or if there's not a tour, walking in and seeing it, that you can usually at least go into the room. They try to keep it available most of the time. So.
And you talk about some of his other controversy. I think he did something for the state of Indiana as well.
Yeah.
And for those who don't know, I believe the Ku Klux Klan was originated in the state of Indiana to begin with. Everybody thinks, well, it's deep south. No, it originated there, and he put it in the mural, which is one of those things they're trying to sweep under the rug and get away from, right?
Well, and so Benton did this mural. It was for the 1933 Chicago World's Fair. And for that World's Fair, a lot of the states around the country had their own pavilions. So they could do this kind of special, something to feature their state. And Indiana wanted to do something different. So they didn't want to have like just farm equipment or something on display, like something boring. So they wanted to hire an artist to do a big mural. And Benton was fairly getting some real notoriety by that point. And so they asked him to do this. And yes, as we were just talking about with the Missouri mural, he was not one to shy away from controversy. But when he does this in 33, the Klan was really, really bad in the 1920s there. And so this wasn't like, 1800s Klan. This was a decade before. And what I think is really interesting is without knowing that history or understanding it, it does look very jarring.
Yeah.
You're like, what is the point of this? It's really kind of, it takes people aback, when they see it, and it's understandable because it is a very dark part of, our history and Indiana's history especially. But But what I think is really interesting is right next to the Klan members, he also showed members of the press. And the press actually brought down the Klan infrastructure in the state of Indiana. I think they won a Pulitzer Prize for it. And I think it was really interesting that he kind of showed them side by side. Like, you've got this dark part of the history, but then you also have this light where the press was able to bring everything to light and take it all kind of down.
Right.
So I think it was interesting that he put those side by side.
Again, the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Exactly.
You know, he did it all. There's no doubt about
Yeah.
that. So all of a sudden he finds himself, he's a regionalist, okay? And all of a sudden regionalism, now we're starting into, he has a controversy in his autobiography, obviously, number one, when he wrote his autobiography. And then all of a sudden that type of art falls out of favor. It's like anything else. It's like music. Everything cycles, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
So his life was about to change, wasn't it, at that point?
You know, it's interesting. I would say kind of in that post-war period when, you know, abstract modernism,
all the stuff
expressionism, Pollock, like we were talking about earlier, Jackson Pollock became huge. And that just really wasn't Benton's style. So he was never a big fan of it. He really said he always wanted art to have some sort of social context, which is why I think it was so popular in the 30s. It was a time the country was struggling. It was nice to see these everyday people and places in his art. So yeah, he did have, just like every artist, periods where he was very in favor, out of favor. I would say later on in his career, he kind of had a resurgence in like maybe the late 60s and 70s before his passing. And that still happens. I would say now his art is fairly well regarded again, but I think in the 1980s, people were like definitely kind of poo-pooing it at the time again. Yeah. So just, I mean, even after his death, it has risen and fallen too. And I would say, even though he definitely maybe wasn't as popular on maybe the big galleries or museums, he still had a very big following where people were still purchasing his art. So he was still fairly comfortable throughout his adult life, later on at least.
Yeah, right.
So from, you know, the 30s up until his death, he wasn't super struggling, but yeah, maybe once again, the critics might not have loved his art quite as much in the 50s and 60s and things like that.
And so you talked a little bit about, there was the piece of art where he has the bare baby bottom and the woman's changed the baby. Well, he wasn't done at that point, right? Talk a little bit about Susanna and the Elders and the clergy at this point, okay?
Yeah, that one is in a California museum now, but that's based on the biblical story. And it shows this woman, you know, bathing, she's naked, bathing in a river. And it's got these guys, you know, kind of creepily looking at her. So that one, and he did these two kind of back to back. So he did Susanna and the Elders and Persephone with, you know, kind of, like I said, back to back within Persephone, which we have at the Nelson-Atkins. And it's actually one of my personal favorites. But that was another nude that was considered very outrageous for the time, because you've got this young woman laying, you know, in this very lush, you know, on the ground and
right next to a little lake or pond.
Beautiful region. It looks like it could be in the Ozarks or something. And then you've got this older guy kind of creeping around the tree at her. So once again, you've got this kind of voyeurism in his art. But I really love that he would occasionally take these older stories or, you know, Greek myths and update them, put them in kind of a modern American setting. So he also did that with the mural he did for Hartsfield's department store. That was based on the Greek myth Oculus and Hercules. And Oculus was a river god, so he incorporated that. He's like, Missouri is a river
Something about
state.
the water and naked women. Okay.
But I love that he would recreate these
You know,
stories.
he really did spend some time in the Ozarks, didn't he?
He really did, yes. And you know what's funny is even after, you know, he hadn't really lived there full time since he was a kid.
Right.
But even after, he would go back almost every year to go on float trips, canoe trips with his friends, fishing trips. We have a really beautiful scene in the dining room that's called Cave Spring. It's on the Current River downtown, or not downtown, down in the state. So I love that he really kind of added that influence of where he grew up, the state that he loved all the time. You know, he would show that. But I love that he updated some of those, you know, scandalous stories and put them in modern American settings. So.
Yeah, and you know he's just sitting there going,
oh yeah, one art.
I'm going to do what I want.
Yes, yeah. One art historian, I think it was in the Ken Burns documentary, said that it was a great work of American pornography or something like that. So, I mean, it was just really fun But yeah, he was never, as we were saying, never one to shy away from a scandal.
Yeah, it's just unbelievable.
Yeah.
He also they had a vacation home in Martha's Vineyard. How much? I'm sure he probably did a lot of work there. I mean, the studio, we're in his studio, it's a original studio. Everything in here is original.
Yeah.
His paintbrushes are sitting over there, I said before. His paint is there. There's a canvas sitting behind us that is blank, but it was sitting there. He has his old chair sitting over here. It's falling apart. I mean, it's unbelievable he was here. But imagine being in here. It's 100 degrees outside.
Yes.
There's no air conditioning. Good time maybe to go back to the East Coast
Tom
and
was
go to
always
Martha's.
smart,
Yeah.
And he did that even, so Tom and Rita started that tradition. I think the first year they went was maybe 1917, 1919. I always forget that first year, but either way, they went there as young adults when they were still dating. So at the time, they were initially started doing it to escape the heat of New York City, and then continues that tradition to escape the heat and humidity in Kansas City. So it was really a special place for them. But what I always like to tell visitors is, it was not the expensive tourist place that it is now. You know, when they started going there in the late teens, it was a very isolated farming and fishing island. So it wasn't very easy to get to, and that's why before they ever owned a full-time home, either in New York or in Kansas City, they actually were able to buy a little bit of land on Martha's Vineyard. And that has now been in their family for 100 years, which is really neat. So they still, I believe the family still has their original cottage there, which is in Chilmark, was the town that it was close by to. So I always thought that was really special, but he would work there in the summers. But it was also a way for him to escape the critics, escape the cities, escape the heat. So it was really just kind of a few months of kind of rejuvenation for them, I think.
Yeah, and he worked all the way until the end. He worked all the time. It was something he loved, obviously, and something he was very good at. But he worked it right up until the day he died. Yeah.
Like the moment he died.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, and one of my favorite interviews was, I think, from the 1960s, and they were just like, well, Tom, what days are you out in the studio, or like what hours do you work? And he just goes, daylight. Like, if there's daylight, I'm out here working. And he said, when I'm not drawing, I'm thinking about drawing. So I would almost call him like a borderline workaholic, because he truly did. He was an incredibly dedicated artist. He treated art like a full-time job. But Rita, I haven't mentioned her quite as much. His wife was incredibly skilled at sales. She was better with bookkeeping. In many ways, she was better with people, because she didn't always make them,
Well, he wasn't very good with people.
Okay, like I said, you either loved him or you hated him. Not always a lot of in between. So yeah, they balanced each other very well in that regard. And so she also did a lot of the framing here at the house, where she would kind of physically put the canvases into frames. Sometimes she'd do some decorating on the frames, and then was responsible really for the sales aspect of it too.
Yeah, and I think he started doing lithographs too, and trying to sell them
for
$5 a piece, so that everybody could afford art.
Yes.
Whereas most, his murals, no way you could afford his murals.
It's actually a really cool story. He started working with the Associate American Artists. It started in 1934 with, artists that were fairly well known at the time. And the idea, as you said, it was kind of like their motto was kind of like art for every home. And so Benton, along with some other quite well-known artists of their period, started making these lithographs, as you said, for about $5 a piece. You could order them in certain catalogs and magazines. And it was that way you could have art from a well-known artist in your home without having to pay the price of one of his massive paintings. So Benton was very adamant about, being able to enjoy art in your daily life. Whether it was with murals, because they were often in public buildings, you could see those while you were out and about, or being able to afford a lithograph in your own home. So I really actually appreciate that side of it, because in many years, and just historically, art was really only accessible for the very wealthy, or the churches, or you know what I mean? So it was kind of a change that was coming about in the 20th century to make art slightly more affordable for the average person.
Just to give you an idea how popular the man was, his self-portrait was on the cover of Time magazine.
1934.
How about that?
So it was in December of 34, so not long after the 1933, which went into 34, World's Fair. After that had closed, and it was really the first article that talked about regionalism as a school of art. So Grant Wood and John Stuart Curry, the other two kind of leading regionalist painters of that era, were also in the article, but I think Benton, being the best known, got the cover spot. And yes, they used his own self-portrait, which he always looked incredibly surly in his self-portrait.
Yeah, right.
It's like very stern, always holding a paintbrush or something. But I love that, yeah, he got on the cover, and it was a big deal. It kind of, once again, was right in that period where he's going from being known more in the art world to truly becoming a national figure. And Time, I mean, it's still a big magazine, but it was especially during that era.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, you really have to believe, too, his wife, Rita, you can talk about her more now, I think she kept him more on an even keel.
Yes.
Too,
yeah.
I think, and really kept the house together. And I think he did a way better job being a dad than his dad being a father to him.
Yeah,
too.
I mean, he certainly had long absences when he was doing his sketching trips, and Rita, being this incredibly supportive partner, was like, when he's out on the road, I don't always expect to hear from him, but I know, he'll be back, and yeah, I love that they were very supportive of their kids pursuing, as I mentioned, pursuing music or the arts. And so, yeah, he and his daughter Jessie in particular were quite close when she was growing up. Every year he would do a portrait of Jessie as a birthday present, things like that. So I think especially once they were in this house and he was a more settled, established artist by then, he could be a lot more present for them. So compared to many artists, he had a very stable home life and a very supporting spouse. And they just balance each other very well. Yeah.
So what about the kids? What was there? Just give me their impact on this whole situation as well.
So both kids, as I think we might have mentioned earlier, but they both kind of were interested in the arts. Her brother, Jessie's brother, TP, it stood for Thomas Piacenza Benton, kind of a mouthful for a little kid, They used his initials as a nickname his whole life. But he became a professional flautist. He played with the Boston Symphony, quartets, trios. As you mentioned, he also loved sailing and actually made some of his own sailboats. Their daughter Jessie dabbled in painting. She played guitar and sang kind of semi-professionally when she was younger. She also founded like an artist commune, and so all very interested in the arts. But the reason, kind of, as I think you might have been asking, their impact on the site was at Benton's memorial. Rita Benton said she wanted the home to be preserved. And you may have read this, but Rita died 11 weeks after Tom did.
Right after Tom. Mm-hmm.
And I think,
they were married for 53 years.
53 years, yeah.
And to have the instability of his home life, and then to have the stability of Rita.
Of them, yes.
Was just, it was way better,
53 years. And he said, I would have been a bum without Rita, which I don't doubt.
You know what, I believe that too.
I'm just glad he acknowledged it. He was talking to Rita's brother apparently, and he's like, your sister's not always been the easiest person to live with, but I was a bum when she found me, and I would still be a bum without her. They definitely worked well in that regard. But yeah, she said that she wanted it to be preserved. And after her death, their children were both adults, and I think they knew their mom's wishes, they respected them, so the kids really only took things that were specifically left to them. And then the state, knowing that this great artist had lived here, he was born here.
Harry Truman's favorite artist.
He was the best damned artist in America. That's what Truman said. That they really knew right away that they wanted to preserve it and make it a historic site. So I think the legislature passed a bill, and they purchased it from the Benton estate in early 1977. I think it was March of 77. Right. So it was a very quick turnaround as far as becoming a historic site is concerned. And that's why it's all still here. And I think it was in large part because the kids, they didn't fight their mom's wishes or anything like that. So they, I think, were pretty supportive of that endeavor, which is nice too.
Right. Let's talk about the Thomas Hart Benton home and studio museum, which is actually the smallest state historic site in the state of Missouri. Yes. It might be the smallest in the entire country, for all we know, right?
Yes, I'm sure someone will tell you in the comments, oh, this one is a smaller one. And the house itself is pretty substantial, but the property is only 1/3 of an acre.
Right.
So the house and then the studio, which is technically in the old carriage house, basically take up almost the entire property. There's a tiny little garden on the side, and then there's a massive kind of courtyard and stone driveway that go all the way around the house, and that's pretty much it. So even though the homes the buildings are decent sizes, it's just that's what it only is essentially. Right. But yeah, we've been a state park or historic site, I guess more technically, since 1977. And we are open, just for anyone who might want to visit after listening, we're open 5 days a week from Thursday to Monday. and do tours on the hour except for noon. So, we usually offer 5 tours a day.
Wow.
So, and we do lots of, special groups. Like we had an art history class last week. We do outside programs, like just last week as well. I did a program at the Midwest Genealogy Center over in Independence, which was really fun. So we really have an opportunity here, with everything being original, there are certain restrictions and limitations, but we try to kind of, I think, embody the spirit that the Bentons would want.
Right.
Like we had a house show with a Nashville musician who played in the living room, just like the Bentons used to. We were talking about Saturday Night at Tom Benton's. So we did that for fun. It was just a really small, intimate concert in their home, which they used to love. We also have participated in Porch Fest 3 different years. Are you familiar with Porch Fest? So it is actually a national thing that started, I'm not sure how long ago, but Kansas City's done it several different times. And basically a neighborhood will kind of collectively agree and say, yes, we'll host Porch Fest this year. And so all these homes sign up and say, bands can play on our porch the whole day. And so we, once again, with the Bentons loving music, having their friends play over all the time, we were like, we should sign up for Porch Fest. So when Roanoke hosted it a few different times, we've had bands come over and play on the porch. And so that's also a really fun way to get involved in our community too. So
yeah, sure.
It's a fun historic site. Like I said, certain limitations just because it is all original. So, we can't have like massive parties there or rent it out for events.
This won't be an Airbnb anytime soon, will it?
Well, although we have had people call and ask.
I'll bet they have.
They're like, do you guys rent out the rooms? I'm like, it's all original, so we can't. I'm sorry.
Sure, right.
But, or we've also been asked because we're in the park system, like, do you guys have camping on site? I'm like, no. So I'm sorry, guys. So,
want to camp on a cobblestone outside on the driveway?
That would be really uncomfortable. So, yeah, we've obviously been asked because there is a little, confusion. Like, well, you're a state park.
Yeah.
But I think what we can do here is really fun. We've been able to kind of, do some alternate kinds of events and of course just our day-to-day tours, which I really love doing. I've been here.
Obviously.
I've been here since 2011, and most people would be like, aren't you so sick of doing them? But I always tell people we get really fantastic visitors. They often either love history or art or architecture just because they love old homes, or sometimes all 3. And so they're really enjoyable to talk to. And I cannot tell you how rewarding it is. Like most times, at the end of the tour, people were like, I can tell you really love your job. And I'm like, yeah, I have a great job.
Yeah.
It's really fun. I get to talk to people about art and history and so.
How many visitors do you get a year, approximately?
It varies, especially depending on like the special events and things
sure.
we do. Usually between 3,000 and 5,000. So it, depends on if we do a Porch Fest or something.
That's
like
right,
that.
exactly.
So it's a smaller historic site, and because it doesn't have insane amounts of people walking through the home, we are allowed to be a bit more lenient, like we keep the rooms more open. We don't have every single room just blockaded off. And so when you walk into the house, it really, as we like to say, it's like they stepped outside for the afternoon, which is kind of fun.
Yeah, they stepped away. The Bentons left for the day, and you're allowed to come tour the house.
And that's really what it looks like.
Yeah,
So we really do try to keep it kind of more open and relaxed. We don't have a scripted tour, which I think is also more fun. We try to keep it almost like you and I are doing right now, where it's just more of a conversation. Yeah. We have kind of standard things that we'll mention in each area of the house, but we want to just learn as much as we can. And so that way, when people ask us questions, we can kind of usually offer a pretty good answer for them, or have a pretty good answer for them.
What do you think Thomas Hart Benton would say about Kansas City?
I think he really loved being here. In his later years, after he was established, he could have easily moved to many other parts of the country had he wanted to leave. But he loved his home state. And, it's funny, as we kind of mentioned, he and Truman did get to know each other later in life. And they got to be very good friends once Harry Truman was back from, public office. He was living in Independence. And I think they discussed, we both love Missouri, we both love history, and we both love bourbon. Like, what's not to like? So
my house or yours?
Bonded, exactly. Yeah, exactly. They had a mutual friend in the neighborhood, Randall Jesse, who was a TV personality for many years.
That's right, he was for a long time, yeah.
And that's who kind of organized he's like, they're both over at his house for dinner one night, and they're like, you should do a mural at Harry's presidential library. And Tom was like, I could be convinced to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. You got the money, honey. I got the time.
Yeah. So I think he really loved being here, loved the city, and it was a way to stay connected with his roots. So yeah.
That's great. And you're a native Kansas Citian.
I am, yes.
You're still here.
I know, and I loved it too. You know, went away for college for a while, came back, and I studied history in college, so I'm actually a historian by trade. But my focus was Kansas City history. When I had the opportunity to be like, okay, I can do this capstone project on anything I want. You know, some people picked like medieval Germany, and I was like, I want to talk about Kansas City. So I've always loved the city, and it means a lot, and that's why I'm here.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, and this is one of the great places, 3616 Bellevue in Kansas City, Missouri, the Thomas Hart House Studio Museum. And I can't thank you enough, Katie. It's just been
It's been really
wonderful.
fun. Yes.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun.
Come visit. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I learned a lot more about Thomas Hart Benton now than I ever knew. And
no, I'm glad you came by.
It's just incredible. Another one of our great citizens here in KC.
Yes.
So,
yeah, it's fun. I'm so glad you guys are featuring him. And yeah.
Another reason why.
Yeah.
There's just something about Kansas City.
There is. Yeah. Thank you, guys.
There's Just Something About Kansas City is a registered 501c3 nonprofit organization with the mission of documenting the stories that have built our city to inspire and educate generations to come. Our work is being made possible by the generous support of local partners like you. You can help us share these stories by becoming a sponsor today. Visit somethingaboutKC.org to learn more.